Let's talk to Sir Robert Goodwill, who is a Conservative MP and also Chairman of the Environment Committee in Parliament, the Select Committee. Sir Robert, thank you for joining us.
I welcome this news today, actually, because even the Climate Change Committee admit we'll need to be using oil and gas in 2050. And the question is not whether we have oil and gas, it's whether we have it from our own resources or import it from places like Qatar or the United States or oil from Saudi Arabia.
So you welcome this today. What about concerns from environmentalists? I'm actually going to be speaking to someone from Just Stop Oil a little bit later on in regard to this. They will, of course, be very worried that we're not investing even more in, well, we are investing quite a lot in renewable energy, but oil and gas is not a step back in some ways.
Well, gas for electricity generation was progress in terms of phasing out coal. And as we make that progression to more nuclear, which I suspect some of these environmentalists won't support, and more renewables, we will still need oil and gas in the meantime. And even if we phase out oil-powered vehicles, petrol and diesel cars by 2050, those cars will still be on the road for 15 years. So we'll still need oil and gas for that. I think there's a lot of virtue signaling going on there, and lack of awareness of the reality that we are making a transition between now and 2050, and we will need oil and gas in the meantime as we make that progress. We just can't do it overnight.
And that's the point, isn't it? It is that transition. It is that we do need supply, because if we don't have supply, where's it going to come from?
Yeah, and also part of this announcement today is for carbon capture, utilisation and storage. So the Acorn project in the northwest of Scotland and the Viking project in Humberside near me here will capture that carbon dioxide and ensure it doesn't go into the atmosphere. So there are ways of consuming oil and gas that doesn't contribute to greenhouse gases and global warming. Another example of this, I suspect, is the coal mine in West Cumbria, which is metallurgical coal, not for producing energy, not thermal coal, but coal to make steel. And the question then would be, do we use coal from our own resources in the UK, or do we import it to Scunthorpe and Port Talbot from Australia? And, the environmental positive solution there is not to import it halfway across the world, but to use our own resources. It's good for jobs here, it's good for the balance of payments, and it's good for the taxpayer, because you can't have a windfall tax on oil and gas if that's being produced in Russia or Qatar or the United States using fracking technology.
Can I ask as well, actually, in terms of this idea of a war on the motorist? You are Chairman of the Environment Committee, of course. Do you think there is a war on the motorist, and do you think that it will end under this review of low traffic neighbourhoods?
Well, the problem with low traffic neighbourhoods is that it's, you've got nice leafy residential streets where you ban the cars, but that just forces them into the rat runs, which tend to be where the poorer people live. And it's a bit the same with the LEZ. Wealthy people can buy an electric car or a hybrid ar and evade it. It's the people who are on limited incomes who need their car to get to work or need their vans. If they're window cleaners or electricians, plumbers, they need their vans. So, I think the burden of addressing the issue of climate change should fall more squarely upon those most able to pay. And I think the problem, particularly as came out in that Uxbridge by-election, is that this will fall on those least able to pay and have real consequences for those people, some of whom who work on social hours and can't use public transport in the same way maybe that commuters can.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And also, you'll be aware as someone in a constituency in Yorkshire that the kind of public transport that people, for example, in central London have is just not the same in the rest of the UK, and we have to be very mindful of that, don't we?
That's right. We have a bus here. It's on a Thursday.
Yes, and not every Thursday.
And
you should write to your local MP about that.
It isn't really a solution in rural areas. People need to get to work. We're farmers. If we need a spare part for our combine, we don't want to have to wait until the bus takes us to the dealers to get it. And so, cars and buses, and also for heavier vehicles. We have a 44-ton truck. It's got a 500 horsepower diesel engine. There's no way that's going to be able to convert to electric. Now, It may be that we can have hydrogen vehicles. Same with the tractors, hydrogen or maybe even biogas. But in the meantime, we will need that supply. And this announcement today of 100 new licenses for exploration, I think, is a very positive move. And let's not forget that the UK is at the top of the G7 in terms of performance. We've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by more than 40% since 2090, the base level. So we are doing what we need to do. And funny enough, if you look at countries like Germany, it's the Green Party in Germany that forced them to close down their nuclear power stations, which is now they're more reliant on coal and lignite, the most dirty form of energy generation, or indeed reliant on Russian gas, which of course now the wheels have come off that particular wagon. So, I think that we have shown by rolling out offshore wind, by embarking on a new generation of nuclear power stations, that we mean business in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. But, this needs to be done as a transition in a measured way. And using the resources we have on our doorstep in the North Sea, I think is the best way of going forward.
Sir Robert Goodwill, thank you very much indeed. He is chairman of the Environment Committee. What do you make of what he said? Do you agree with it? Do you think he's got a point? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Let's talk now to Alex de Koning, who is with Just Stop Oil. Alex, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You failed, haven't you? Because Rishi Sunak says he's not going to stop oil, he's going to drill for more of it.
Yeah, it's quite sad that he said this. I mean, Just Stop Oil would have stopped overnight if he didn't say it. There would be no more disruption. But of course, now we have to continue because we have to constantly make sure that there's no more oil and gas, in line with what Lord Debon has said, who is the previous chair of the Environment Committee, in line with what the United Nations are saying. He said it's moral and economic badness to introduce new oil and gas, in line with what the Cross-Parliamentary Environment Audit Committee has said. This is what everybody is screaming out for.
But Alex, what are you going to do? Just on that point, actually, on supply, Rishi Sunak says he can get to net zero by 2050, but you've got to have supply. You've got to have fuel for people to live and work and travel, and that has to come, in his mind anyway, from oil and fossil fuels, but even to assist the transition to net zero. Do you not see his argument?
No, I don't. You do need energy, for sure. We cannot just cut off oil. We cannot cut off oil overnight, but we have 8 years of oil in reserves, and we need to start that transition. Opening up these new oil and gas...
You think it can be done in 8 years? We can stop using fossil fuels in 8 years? So it's just stop oil, but not for 8 years? Is that what you're saying?
It's always been just stop new oil. That's the demand of Just Stop Oil. The government's own reports say that the average time to get oil and gas from the North Sea when granting these licenses is 28 years. We're not going to see any benefit for this oil and gas for another 28 years. I don't know about you, but I can't wait that long. My energy bills are through the roof, and most of Southern Europe is on fire.
But Southern Europe isn't on fire. Southern Europe, part of it is quite hot, but it's not there, and there have been wildfires.
There are wildfires all over Greece. Yeah,
well, they're not all over Greece. They're in part of Greece, and they're in part of other countries as well, and many of them are now under control, and the temperatures are going down. So, I mean, this idea of Southern Europe being on fire is not true, is it?
There's a lot of wildfires all over Southern Europe, including Greece, Italy, and many other countries. In the same way that in New York, just a couple of months ago, because of wildfires in Canada, people couldn't leave their homes. 10 million people couldn't leave their homes because they couldn't breathe that air. Are you really telling me that we're not in a climate emergency when we're looking at thousands and thousands of British tourists not able to get back because of wildfires and roads?
Well, they'll get back eventually. I mean, obviously it's a massive inconvenience.
So you have no sympathy for these tourists?
I do have sympathy for the tourists, but I've actually more sympathy for the people who actually live there, who have to put up with this, and the people who work in the tourist industry. But you presumably would not have a tourist industry because you don't want people flying there in the first place.
What's going to impact the tourist industry is the fact that the climate crisis is making it almost impossible to go out to these places abroad.
Not true. Roads had between 10 and 15% of the island of Rhodes was on fire. There were wildfires there, absolutely.
And it was horrible.
Yeah, of course.
And every year it's going to get worse.
And I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but 85% of the island was absolutely fine for people to visit.
Well, every year the climate crisis is going to make these temperatures worse. Next year, it might be 25% of Rhodes that's on fire. The year after, it might be 35%.
You don't know that. That's just off the top of your head, Alex. You're just making that up.
No, it's not off the top of my head. It's the fact that temperatures are rising, and every single year the climate crisis is going to make things worse unless we take action against it.
So the action you would take against it would be to kill the tourist industry in Southern Europe, in places like Rhodes.
Oh, you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, I'm asking you, would it be to say that people can't go there because they shouldn't be able to take flights?
No, I'm not saying that. I am saying what we need is renewable energy. What we need is cheaper public transport. What we need is homes to be insulated so that all of the energy we put into our houses doesn't just leak into the outside air. We have a lot of the solutions. All of them are very well laid out in the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. In the final segment, all the solutions are laid out. We just need to follow them, and they're not doing that. Instead, they're trying to get to net zero by burning oil. That doesn't make sense.
But we're still
we're not going to see any good effect for the next 28 years. It's a long time, Peter.
But we certainly need oil, don't we? We need to get to even if we got to 2050, Rishi Sunak says that even a quarter of our output, a quarter of what we will need is still oil and gas. And if you don't have it from here in Britain, well, you're going to need it from other countries, and it's going to actually have a carbon footprint in terms of getting it there. Just hold on a second. Places like Russia, where we have, okay, it's only a small amount, but other countries as well, where actually the price will stay high and we will have a carbon footprint actually getting here because we need to use it.
Peter, that's not true. At the last government auction, renewables were 9 times cheaper than gas. 9 times cheaper. And solar and wind power can be built in a matter of months as opposed to 28 years. Of course we can start this transition. Why would we wait? It's cheaper. It's better for the everyday person. We get cleaner air. You're less likely to get 40-degree heat waves every year. Why wouldn't we have renewables?
Why do you use the phrase the climate crisis? Why is that a phrase that you use a lot? A lot of our viewers and listeners aren't too happy with that.
I mean, have you seen what's happening in Rhodes? What's happened in New York earlier? The Canadian wildfires. This is getting worse every single year.
A lot of them were started by arsonists as well.
No, they're not.
Well, they were. There's proof to show that many of the ones in Southern Europe, certainly in Rhodes, were started by arsonists. So I mean, it's not just the dryness.
Was the 40-degree temperature last summer here in the UK, was that started by arsonists?
No, I'm not saying it was for a second. I would never argue that. But in terms of, I mean, we are top of the G7 in terms of what we're doing. The UK is 1% of the global emissions. I mean, what you're advocating would take huge change, would take huge economic change, would take huge change in the way that people live. And actually, if you look at the statistics and the polling, about 70% of people say that they want to get to net zero. They support that policy. But 55% of people say they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to have the huge inconvenience that they would need to have in their lives. Things like, you know, we're talking about the war on the motorists today, low traffic neighbourhoods, ULEZ and so on. But that's something you support. How are you going to convince people, Alex?
Peter, as you say, a lot of people want more action on the climate crisis. I don't know if you heard me. Renewables are 9 times cheaper than gas, which is, and oil is more expensive than that. 9 times cheaper. This is not going to cost the everyday taxpayer a lot of money. The UK led the Industrial Revolution. Now we need a green industrial revolution, okay? We have to make this change. We have to come ahead of it. Why wouldn't we want to do that? I'm talking about cleaner air. I'm talking about cheaper public transport.
Yes, but,
I'm talking about warmer homes in the winter.
Okay, Alex, but if you go to renewables, for example, one way to go to renewables, which some people or to be greener, which some people do, is to use encouragement to get an electric car. We have seen electric cars cost between £20,000 and £30,000 often, or a lot more than that. A lot of people can't afford that. There are people, I've spoken to numerous people over the past few days who say the ultra low emissions zone charges in London mean that they will have trouble working. They'll have trouble getting to work and paying to get to work. A lot of people see your agenda and see the green agenda and just see cost. They don't see benefit.
First of all, this is not my agenda. These are just my opinions. I've never said anything about electric cars. Electric cars, I mean, people can do as they want.
Maybe I can ask you about electric cars. Do you think, I mean, you accept that the majority of journeys in this country, factually, are made by car. Public transport should be better. I think we can probably both agree on that. But I mean, I was talking to Sir Robert Goodwill in North Yorkshire. He's not living in London most of the week anyway. He's in North Yorkshire, where he says, you know, there are only a few buses a day in various places. The public transport infrastructure just isn't there.
That's horrible.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard that, and that's horrible. So let's get some more buses. That's an obvious solution, right? Let's make train travel subsidised. Right now, we're subsidising the oil and gas industry with £236 million every single week. Why are we using that to subsidise trains?
Where are you getting that figure, Alex?
That figure is from the UK government's own reports about what's happening in the North Sea.
Okay.
The North Sea Transition Fund.
Alex, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Alex de Koning there from Just Stop Oil. Appreciate him joining me today. Lots of reaction to this. Lots of people want to get their voice heard on this, and you will have your voice heard in just a few minutes here on TalkTV.